Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to an impromptu stream, an article read of something that came out the other day that piqued my interest because of its subject matter and the allegations included, at least in the original tweet. We'll get to that in a second, but who's joining me for this afternoon Friday stream? Darth Mando, Keeverdam, Tales of Gore, good afternoon. And for those of you who are lurking or in the future, hello. So yes, Dungeons and Dragons, long time controversial subject matter for people who have absolutely no idea about what Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games actually are, and really are to people who handle them in a healthy way. There are ways to handle them in an unhealthy way, but like with so many things, it is as dangerous as you decide to make it. But we'll get into that in a moment. First, thank you so much, Derek LaRue, again. You are a consistent and appreciated supporter of the channel. Thank you so much. I appreciate that very much, your generosity. I feel as though I should do something in return for this. In the olden days, this might have been before your time, on Lords of the Night, I used to do custom ads. People would, donate $5 or something, and then I would go back between shows and write an ad for something they wanted to advertise, whether it was real or imagined. You've been so consistent in your support lately. I feel as though, truth be told, I devalue my own contribution to entertainment as it is. So if there's something, you'd like me to do a voiceover on or something else, just let me know. I appreciate it. I mean, if not, that's fine too. But either way, I feel like I should do something beyond. But anyway, that's just my insecurity speaking. Or it might be the Pepperjack speaking. But let's get on with this. This is an article from the PBS NewsHour about Dungeons and Dragons. And the reason that I'm reading this is because the tweet attached to this article said something to the effect of the creator of Dungeons and Dragons was a race essentialist. Now, truth be told, out of my personal vocabulary, I'm not quite sure what race essentialism means. Hopefully this article will tell me, but it sure sounded derogatory of Gary Gygax. And truth be told, I am not a professional biographer of Gary Gygax. I'm pretty sure that Gary Gygax was not a perfect person. But all the same, even if the person behind Dungeons and Dragons was not a perfect person, the implication is that somehow he imbued his work with something untoward to society. And I haven't heard that kind of rhetoric, at least not in any strident form, since the 1980s, when people were freaking out about Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games influencing teenagers to commit occult acts of self-sacrifice or something. You might see this most readily in the film Mazes and Monsters, starring Tom Hanks, which was about as close to the Dungeons and Dragons panic that you could get as far as a dramatic interpretation. If you haven't seen Mazes and Monsters, oh man, pardon. Anyway, let's get on with this. I haven't read this yet, so this is all going to be new to me as we go. Let me close that out. Okay, how a new generation of gamers is pushing for inclusivity beyond the table. Yes, because as we know, role-playing games are completely and totally gate-kept by people, and no one is allowed to join who aren't an insider. Now, I know this to be an absolute untruth. I've been playing role-playing games, either live action or tabletop, for the better part of my adult life in one way, shape, or form. I spent 10 years near on at a live-action role-playing group. And I tell you what, the barrier for entry was about as low as you could get, insofar as who could join. We didn't interrogate people about their personal lives. The only times that it ever became an issue is if someone's personal life became a problem for the group. We had people bring their personal dramas in, and personal dramas were created amongst the people as they developed relationships one to another. But outside of that, I can't imagine a more inclusive environment than I was in than that group. Anyone could join. All you had to do was bring your enthusiasm and your love for the subject matter, and your creativity. It was fine. Now, if you decided to be a jerk just as a regular person to other people, yeah, you weren't allowed to do that. You weren't a really popular person if you treated people badly. But as far as the first step in the door, there was no gate. There was no keeping. Thank you, Keeper Dan. Puppy GoFundMe is in the chat. Yes, the GoFundMe for Twisted Skipster's puppy, Rosebud. I'm going to pin that to the top of the chat box. Please, if you have the opportunity to take a look at that or share it, if you can't donate, I can understand. It's just after the holidays and everybody's getting their finances in order. But our friend Twisted Skipster's puppy got hit by a car, and Rosebud's hip got fractured. And they're looking for just $800 in funding to pay the vet bills. As of right now, they're at 565 of that goal. So if you have a couple of bucks to spare, please consider donating there. Or again, if you can't, understandable, please consider sharing it on your social medias if you're able. Okay, anyway, enough preamble. Let's get into this. For decades, players of tabletop role-playing games, TTRPGs, have used dice, pens, and paper to engage in a form of entertainment that combines collective storytelling with strategic puzzle solving and combat simulation. That is a true statement. Once considered a niche hobby, these types of games are experiencing a boost in mainstream visibility thanks to series like Netflix's Stranger Things and the upcoming film Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. I suppose that is true. Yeah, Stranger Things probably did more to give a profile to Dungeons and Dragons than any other property in recent memory. I don't think the Dungeons and Dragons film, which is oncoming, is going to do a heck of a lot because at least from the trailers and the press I've seen on it, it looks kind of goofy, kind of silly, kind of Marvel humor. Yeah, I don't think Dungeons and Dragons aficionados are going to appreciate it all that much, but it does bring visibility to the brand, so whatever. According to industry estimates, hobby game sales soared during the pandemic, increasing from about $1.6 billion in 2019 to over $2.6 billion in 2021. Tabletop role-playing games saw a 31% increase in overall sales in 2020. In 2022, Dungeons & Dragons generated some $100 million to $150 million. Wowzers. Holy cats, Brett Ide. Dude. Thank you so much. Oh my God. Going to have to slide you off topic for a moment. What is your exact pepper jack recipe? Parts to parts, etc. Okay, this is my basic pepper jack recipe. It's about a finger of Jack Daniels. So like if you put your finger up against the bottom of where the glass is, it's about a finger and a quarter, not too much, because I'm a lightweight, truth be told. So I don't need a whole heck of a lot to get an effect. And then after that, it is one mini can of Dr. Pepper. So you find those mini cans, not the full like 8-ounce suckers, but whatever the mini cans are, like 6.5 or something. So one mini can of Dr. Pepper to one finger's worth of Jack Daniels. And if I want to give myself a little bit more kick with the Jack Daniels, obviously a little bit more Jack Daniels. But that's my general recipe. You don't want the Jack Daniels to overpower the Dr. Pepper. You want it to enhance the Dr. Pepper. So oftentimes when I have, like say a Jack and Coke somewhere else, depending on the power of the drink, I'll say, well, that's a lot more Jack than it is Coke. You want to find your personal balance where the flavor of the Dr. Pepper is not overtaken by the Jack Daniels. So that is the recipe, such as it is. Exact measurements can't give you. Everybody's their own, but the components are Jack Daniels and one can of mini Dr. Pepper. So there you go. And thank you again, Brett Ide, so much. That's ridiculously generous. And congratulations on your recent promotion. That's as much as I'll say about that. Yeah, so thank you again. I hope that helps. As tabletop RPGs permeate popular culture through podcasts, live-streamed internet shows, and celebrity boosters, which has been going on for decades prior to this, but okay, the community surrounding them is becoming more diverse. No, the community surrounding them has always been diverse. Always been diverse. You guys are talking about this like it's some grand current revelation. It has been this way for decades. You know why that is? I'll tell you why that is. Because nerds didn't have many friends. Okay, speaking as a nerd, a kid that grew up on the margins of society because I was not athletic and I was not self-confident and I kept to myself and I had interest in things like comic books and science fiction and role-playing games. Let me tell you something. There's a certain what's that phrase that goes, necessity is the mother of invention? Okay, well, lack of social contact is the mother of letting people in who share your same interests. Doesn't roll off the tongue very well, but see, when I didn't have many friends who shared interests that I had, when I found people who shared those interests, that was what was important. Not what they looked like, not how tall they were, not their skin color, not their gender. Because you see, when you're a nerd, it's about interests. It's about making a connection with someone on at least a subject matter level, an intellectual level, a shared passion level. That is the barrier for contact. Okay? And so I don't know what to tell you, PBS, but insofar as I'm concerned, insofar as every experience I have ever had in dealing with the role-playing game community, it has always been diverse. It has let people in from all stripes because they shared a similar passion for the game, for the storytelling, for the setting, whatever. But I might go off further as we proceed. Traditionally seen as a pastime for white male suburbanites, go fuck yourself. Just go fuck yourself, PBS. Tabletop gaming has more recently become a platform for minorities and marginalized people to tell their own stories. Everybody who loved tabletop RPGs back in the day were marginalized. You know why they were marginalized? Because they liked tabletop RPGs. Their very interest in the subject matter made them marginalized from everybody else because they were diminished as nerds, as geeks, as freaks. To be interested in these things put you on the margin, made you a minority amongst your social peers. It wasn't your skin color. It wasn't your genitals. It was your interest in this subject. I wasn't interested in sports. I wasn't interested in going out for all of the extracurricular activities at school. I liked reading my books, reading my comic books, watching my TV shows, and playing the games I like to play. And that set me on the margin. Not what I looked like, although that certainly didn't help, but hey, you know. Quote, people of color and women have always been a part of tabletop RPG culture, said Stephen Daschel, a postdoctoral fellow at American University who specializes in studying male-dominated subcultures. If they've always been part of tabletop RPG culture, then how has it been a male-dominated subculture? And how can you say that if they've always been involved, then what is the problem? But, quote, actual play shows, unquote, actual play shows, the term for a tabletop role-playing game performed for audiences. Actual play shows? Okay, well, I must be out of the loop. I've never heard that term before. Because I don't usually do games for audiences. I've been thinking about trying to attempt that at some point in the future online, but I haven't done that. Is that what that's called? Actual play shows, APS? Give them more visibility, Daschel added. Okay, so it's never been a matter of tabletop RPG culture keeping people out based on their gender or skin color. It's just that now people are seeing that tabletop RPGs are letting people in because of their skin color and gender? What? Abria Iyengar, I might be mispronouncing that. If so, I apologize, is something of a celebrity game master, if you say so, or someone who facilitates tabletop RPG sessions for players at a table. Yes. She has appeared on many popular actual play channels such as Critical Role and Dimension 20, as well as shows directly sponsored by Wizards of the Coast, the company that owns Dungeons & Dragons. Well, yes, they own Dungeons & Dragons and probably forever will. They didn't used to, obviously, but there you go. Thank you, Shady Grin. I debated sending you this article myself, but I wasn't sure if you would be interested. Anyway, Happy New Year, Scribe. Thank you, Shady Grin. Happy New Year. Excuse me. And all the best to you and your friends and loved ones. Hope everything's doing well for you in this 2023. So far, fingers crossed. Knock for Micah. When playing, Iyengar said, she gravitates towards non-human characters like elves and merfolk. Okay. Quote, growing up and accultured as other on several axes of identity, my brain automatically defaults to that, says Iyengar, who is black and a member of the LGBTQ community. You know, you could have just not mentioned any of that and I wouldn't have cared, but now you've made it an issue. Why does it have to be an issue? What does that have to do with anything? Quote, even though it is uncomfortable to be othered constantly, it is what I know and it feels right. There is not the trauma attached to otherization, so it feels like a fun opportunity to play in what if being markedly different came with fun benefits, unquote. Welcome to Let's Pretend for Everyone. Imagine, if you will, as a child, wanting to be Luke Skywalker or Princess Leia or Chewbacca because your normal life is relatively mundane. And then you watch this movie with all of these larger-than-life figures doing larger-than-life things. Would it be fun to imagine myself in a situation where I'm the hero with special powers and abilities? Boy, oh boy. Obviously, only people in minority demographics ever have that reflex, ever have that notion. It's not a shared notion amongst people in general or imaginative people at large. No. It's only a saving grace for those who feel othered. Well, I'll tell you what, I felt othered for the better part of my entire growing up. I was shorter than the other kids. I was shyer than the other kids. I was interested in more intellectual things than the other kids. I was beat up and bullied and minimized and made to feel ashamed of myself by the other kids around me. And so I escaped into those places where I could feel like I had some control over things, like imagination and play and role-playing games and video games and comic books and superheroes and things like that. Not because of my skin color, not because of my sexuality, which was irrelevant most of the time growing up, but just because that is a natural human reflex to trying to find some place in the world, to trying to find some sense of power and assertiveness and role models. Oh, but I guess this is just unique to you because of your unique, quote unquote, otherizations, which no one has any experience with in any other otherizations. But okay. When Iyengar was new to tabletop gaming, she would often go to a local gaming store to play in community events organized by Wizards of the Coast, but she sometimes felt like an outsider in a space where most players were white men. Well, that says more about Iyengar than it says about the people who were playing the games with her, doesn't it? Doesn't that say something more about her perception of other people based on their race and gender? Quote, those were uncurated tables where things got very monoculture very quickly, she said. Monoculture. Okay, so if you have a particular skin color and a particular gender, there's only one culture. There weren't any differences amongst any of those individual people. They didn't have individual hang-ups, individual ideas, individual imaginations. No, you only saw them as a race and a gender. Sorry, who's not being inclusive in the tabletop RPG culture here? Recently, actual plays have been finding port with a new generation of gamers, many of whom come from more diverse backgrounds, even though women and minorities have been part of tabletop RPG culture from the beginning, says your own expert. But anyway, Social media allows fans of these shows to form communities and organize meetups where they can play the games that they watch. Yes, the internet has been amazing for getting people together to do tabletop RPGs that prior to the internet wouldn't have known each other even existed. I mean, the internet has been a godsend for lonely nerds to find other people who share their same passions. It's also been a Russian roulette, depending on who you end up with. But anyway, quote, this new guard of hobby geeks are highly aware, and if they are not directly BIPOC people, they are allies, said Aaron Trammell, an assistant professor of informatics at UC Irvine. If they are not directly BIPOC people, they are allies. God forbid you look at people outside of their skin color. And then you divvy them up amongst, well, I mean, BIPOC people are on this level. Anybody who's not BIPOC, well, they're at least allies. They're at least servants and sycophants. You know, they can't be BIPOC people, but at least they're supporters. Tell me about inclusion again. Tell me about lowering barriers to inclusion. But even within these gaming communities, there is some friction. Old School Renaissance, or OSR, is a gaming movement whose players claim they are, quote, against outside politics permeating their game space, unquote, said Daschle. These players support the use of traditional fantasy tropes in game design, such as the existence of good and evil races with no nuance. You mean good and evil fictional races? Okay. OSR gamers, I've never heard this term before either. OSR, okay, are often seen as the old guard of tabletop gaming and tend to idealize the past, which, quote, defaults to a white masculine worldview, unquote, Trammell said. Oh, a white masculine worldview. When you just said earlier that people of color or minorities and women have been part of gaming since the beginning. Okay, what is a white masculine worldview? What defines a white masculine worldview? What sense of perception and reality can I know when I look at a white male that they share with every other white male? What quality of thinking shall I assign to a skin color and a gender? Oh, expert, you tell me that, and I'll tell you who's the racist. Good gravy. Created in the 1970s, Dungeons & Dragons is one of the first and most prominent tabletop RPGs, Daschle said. Quote, and race has been a key in character design, unquote. Fictional races. Races that predominantly originated in the Lord of the Rings books. Orcs, elves, dwarves, and humans. Those are your basic fantasy genre races. When players create their in-game personas, they generally choose different aspects from a menu that culminates in an imaginary character with a history, personality, physical traits, and special talents. Characters can be one of many different quote-unquote races. Why do you put quotes around that? They're literally different races of beings, such as humans, elves, or dwarves. Yes, generally speaking, human, elves, and dwarves are the playable races in Dungeons & Dragons, although they have added many, many more over the years. These character types... No. What? These character types? No, they're races. These character types could be considered various species. They are various species. They have very specific special traits. That's why some races have advantages that the others don't have in abilities or ability scores or language access or different powers or different knowledges. Some resemble real animals, while others are more like dragons or even angels. Yeah, sure, there's like the Dragonborn or whatever, yeah. But the different beings have always been racially coded, according to Daschle, with humans specifically, quote, having always been seen as an analog for white. Who the hell are you? What are you even talking about? Humans. They're called humans, not whites. Good gravy. Okay. My goodness. Calm down. Calm down. Oh, Pepperjack, you my only friend. Dungeons & Dragons has a tradition of promoting humans as the best or most versatile characters. Are you out of your mind? Everybody and their brother wants to play some elven assassin or something, or some dwarf barbarian. The best or most versatile? No, they are the standard. They're the basic. They are like the everyman. It's the other races that get all the interesting bonuses and stuff. You know, or racial specific traits and things like what was it? Like the elves have night vision. Just reflexively, they don't have to like buy it on their character sheet or anything. Like, what? Gary Gygax, the creator of Dungeons & Dragons, was a self-described biological determinist. Okay, he believed that different races of people were biologically distinct and capable of different things in life. Different races of people are biologically distinct. That's how that's what makes up different races. What are you talking about? The epicamphid fold, the larkspur heel. There are elements to human diversity that are specific to specific races because of evolution in different parts of the world. It's not a belief, it's how we differentiate between specific races. It's not a value factor in their worthwhileness as humans, it's just an observable fact. Quote, this can be seen in early D&D with non-humans or demi-humans having level caps, said Trammell. Okay, well, I'm not as much an expert in D&D to say whether that's true or not, but even if it is, it's fiction. This means that in earlier editions of the rules, were there other editions after that where things were revised? Non-human characters could never achieve the same degree of growth as human characters. I feel like I'm listening to a TEDx talk on racism in America with someone just forgetting the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay, so do you mean to tell me that in old rules of D&D, things were different than they are now? Okay, what did it look like in 3.5? You know, generally considered probably one of the best D&D editions ever. What was the case in 3.5, which most people, at least the old school ones, still play? What did 3.5 look like? Additionally, orcs were initially created as a group of bestial humanoids with the sole purpose of being killed by players. Yeah, basically from the Lord of the Rings sort of universe. This classic evil race could not be chosen by players for their character until 1993 with the release of The Complete Book of Humanoids, a source book for the second edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. The works of J.R.R. Tolkien are credited as an inspiration for Dungeons & Dragons within the game's own Appendix N, and Tolkien has described orcs in the xenophobic vernacular of 1950s Britain. You know that orcs are fictional, don't you? Orcs are fictional. Over the years and through subsequent editions of the game, these racial allusions have generally been minimized. Sorry, who's alluding to what? Anybody who associates orcs with a specific race, I hate to tell you this, you're the racist. In the summer of 2020, amid a reckoning on race and inclusion throughout many industries, Wizards of the Coast released a statement outlining steps it was taking to help, quote, everyone to feel at home around the game table to see positive reflections of themselves within our own products, unquote. I don't play a role-playing game to be me. I play a role-playing game to represent a fictional version of a character I've come up with who often doesn't look like me or act like me or has any connection to me whatsoever except from my own imagination. Quote, but for every 2 steps forward, they take 1 step back, Trammell said. Yeah, I guess Trammell is just the expert on everything here, citing a recent publication's inclusion of a simian race of humanoids reminiscent of old minstrel shows. A recent publication's inclusion. What are you talking about? I'm going to the hyperlink. We wanted to acknowledge and own the inclusion of offensive material within our recent Spelljammer Adventures in Space content. We failed you, our players and our fans, and we are truly sorry. The campaign includes a people called Hadozi, which first appeared in 1982. Regrettably, not all portions of the content relating to the Hadozi were properly vetted before appearing in our most recent release. As we continue to learn and grow through every situation, we recognize that to live our values, we have to do better. Let me guess, somebody saw a simian race and decided that that was representative of a real-world race. Well, let me tell you something. That makes you the racist, if that's how you see people. Wizards of the Coast also recently presented a new vernacular for the upcoming rules changes to the game, replacing instances of race with species. Oh, okay, rearranging chairs on the Titanic. I'm sure that'll settle all the arguments and complaints. There you go. Are you saying that they're a whole different species now? Just wait. Just wait. Quote, at best, I think this is an earnest appeal to fans that WotC is taking the representation of race seriously in its games. Too seriously. It's a fictional world with fictional peoples and fictional races, and you guys are turning it into culture war nonsense. You are bending the knee to not even a bunch, but to a very, very, very small percentage of people who are trying to be outrage archaeologists. And that's it. And it just shows the weakness of your creative integrity. That's all it does. You're bending to knee the squeakiest wheel on the cart, and everybody else is suffering for it. Copies of 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons are probably very valuable at this point. Thank goodness we live in an age where those things are available electronically, so you can get away from that kind of stuff. Same things happened to Vampire the Masquerade and so many other games over the last several years where people are just so paranoid about offending anybody over something that someone decides to be offended about. Anyway, WotC is taking the representation of race seriously in its games, but at its worst, I really think that this may quash some of the important dialogue that is happening around the topic within fan communities, said Trammell. See, even when they're trying to address the problem, they're still causing a problem. You will never satisfy these morons. You never will. They will always find something to complain about because complaints are their bread and butter. Controversy, conjured up out of the ether, is how they make their living. You'll never satisfy them. You give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk, and it's going to happen over and over again. Quote, the problem never was that race was a concept in fantasy worlds. Instead, it has been that fantasy worlds are the product of any number of white supremacist tropes that mirror those in our own. Quote, the issue was never really race, but essentialism, Daschle agreed. Quote, and essentialism is baked into the system of D&D. It's in its DNA. I think many people would consider it a completely different game as race/species give advantages and disadvantages, and there needs to be a checks and balances system for parity, consistency, and fun. Go away. You're just a party pooper. That's all you are. You are contributing nothing to tabletop role-playing games. And Wizards of the Coast is ridiculously stupid for paying attention to you. parity, consistency, and fun. What is the point of having different, specifically different races in a game if there is not differences between them, advantages or disadvantages otherwise? Look at Skyrim for a second. Okay, Skyrim is probably about as low barrier access for people to have a quasi D&D experience on PC gaming and console gaming. Okay, why do you pick a Khajiit over a Nord? Okay, because Khajiit, the cat race, they're more naturally stealthy. Why? Because they're cats. Why would you pick an Argosian over a Nord? Well, they can breathe underwater because they're amphibians. They specifically possess talents and abilities that other races can't, simply on the basis that they're a different race. That adds variety. That adds diversity. You guys want diversity, but then you want to make everything a plain, tasteless gruel. You have no idea what you're talking about. And Wizards of the Coast is stupid for listening to you. Some game systems outside of D&D are doing away with race as a defining aspect of player characters altogether, while other systems are engaging in stories and worlds with non-white, non-Eurocentric designs. Oh yeah, those have never existed before in tabletop role-playing games. Oh, Legend of the Seven Rings, obviously a totally white and Eurocentric game. Right. Kindred of the Ebony Kingdom. Do you have any idea what you're talking about? You have no idea what you're talking about, do you? Monty Cook, owner of Monty Cook Games and former Dungeons & Dragons designer, developed a setting-agnostic game system. You mean GURPS? Are you talking about GURPS? Meaning it can be used to tell stories in many different genres. Oh, really? Yeah, no unified game systems have ever existed before Monty Cook. Okay? A distinguishing feature is that players can create characters without needing to consider race or species for mechanical perks. Yes, if you can believe it, different gaming systems and different settings have different rules on character creation. I don't know if you're aware of that. Savage Worlds to GURPS. Yeah, these things happen. Right? To the World of Darkness system, right? I mean, oh my gosh. It's amazing, isn't it? Or what was that one that Fantasy Flight put out a few years ago? It was after the Star Wars thing. They put out their own unified gaming system that I'm suddenly not remembering what the name of it is. I have the core book in the other room. Somebody in the chat will remind me. Someone in the chat will remind me. Race and class are pre-made buckets that you fill, he said. By focusing on who your characters are, it gives players more control. Yes, but if you have a very specific setting, like Vampire the Masquerade, like Dungeons and Dragons, like, what's another good one? Oh, like Skyrim, right? Like Fallout. I mean, heaven forfend if somebody wants to play a human character, but someone else wants to play a super mutant. Well, obviously, we have to make their stats completely even all the time, because that's fairer. What's the point in playing a super mutant if there's no differential between it and a regular normal human being? Oh, okay. Yeah. If you make your own setting with different people from different places with different conditions that they lived under, why wouldn't they have different physical and or experiential abilities? Why would you want to reduce the diversity? But yes, if you have an all-in-one gaming system that has no limits on what you can do here and there and otherwise, with no set setting, sure, you can do whatever you want. Yeah, but Vampire the Masquerade, Dungeons and Dragons, Silver Age Sentinels, what are some other games I can think of? Call of Cthulhu. These have very specific settings, sometimes in very specific time periods in American or world history. But of course, you're able to do whatever you want because it's you sitting at a table with a bunch of friends with pens and papers. If you want to do a game where everybody's exactly the same all the time, nobody's stopping you. Right? But oftentimes, you fall in love with the setting. I owned a copy of 3rd edition Vampire the Masquerade for years before I ever played the game itself because I fell in love with the setting. I fell in love with the world and the fiction that it built. I couldn't have known what happens if I roll a pair of dice in that game to save my life for several years before I actually started playing a game of it because I like vampires. I thought vampires were cool. And the version, the lore behind the vampires in Vampire the Masquerade really spoke to me. But it was a specific setting. Is it appropriate to the setting? Do you want to change it? The golden rule. You know, the only rule is having fun. While there are no in-game mechanical benefits to choosing a particular race, because it's a unified game system that is trying to be all things to all people at all times as a matter of its own construction, Monte Cook Games strives to encourage diversity through artwork. The artwork they commission tries to be inclusive by showing women in the Wild West or children of color exploring a haunted house. Wow, thanks, Monte Cook. Sometimes the art depicts people wearing masks so that players can imagine themselves or their characters in those situations. Yeah, I need Monte Cook's artwork so that I can imagine something fictional for my own character. Thanks, Monte Cook. Quote, "We want everyone to feel welcome, to feel seen," Cook said. Great. Give me your book that's just text-based. I don't need the artwork. My imagination can come up with everything in between. Beyond those who play the games, what do they have to do with anything? What is often overlooked is the community of people creating and marketing them. No, I pay very close attention, or at least in the past I did, as to who was publishing the games I liked. Right? When White Wolf had the license for Vampire the Masquerade, when they had a tagline of their own company, which was games for mature minds, and they meant it, the quality of the storytelling and the freedom to the players was amazing. And the adherence to the setting was commendable. And then, when Vampire the Masquerade fell into the hands of other people, it started going sideways into nonsense and feeling about everything and making sure nobody felt bad. A game about bloodthirsty, monsters of the night turned into some, Barney the Purple Dinosaur show by comparison. So I've paid very close attention to who is producing and authoring the games that I like and the settings that I appreciate. And when they start going sideways, I usually don't buy their products anymore. When he started in the business, Cook said, all the designers, artists, and editors were of similar backgrounds and ethnicities. But he is seeing the culture change and become more diverse. Quote, "We want people of all types in the driver's seat," he said. Who founded cyberpunk? You want to go back into old school? Okay, who founded cyberpunk? Who was the main author and founder of the cyberpunk game line? Did anybody give a shit? No, because cyberpunk was cool. It still is cool, although CD Projekt Red has certainly thrown a couple of wrenches into it with its game interpretation and everything else. But either way, one example is Coyote and Crow, a new game focused on telling specifically indigenous stories. Yeah, because that's never happened before. Werewolf the Apocalypse had nothing to do with any kind of indigenous folklore. Guys, did you know this? There have been no games prior to Coyote and Crow that had any elements or focus on indigenous folklore at all. It's never happened before. Only now. Quote, "The more I wanted to create a setting that didn't have colonialism as part of its structure at all, the more I realized the only way to strip that out of the setting was to create an alternate future where colonization never even happened," said Connor Alexander, creator of Coyote and Crow, which has a First Nations setting and themes. Well, good for you, Connor Alexander. You imagine an alternate universe where things were different. Okay. And you're not the first. You won't be the last. PBS apparently has no idea, but whatever. Coyote and Crow began as a reaction to seeing games featuring characters of different cultures without having the same representation behind the scenes building the game. Oh, okay, so this entire project was based on what racism? It wasn't based on, boy, I find that setting, I find that possibility, I find that alternate future, that alternate timeline interesting. I'm really passionate about that culture. Oh, so this was done out of spite. Okay. The project, which raised over $1 million on Kickstarter, allowed Alexander and a team of native designers to create a world and craft stories that were distinctly not Anglo-European. Oh, where's the diversity in that team? Where's the diversity? Okay. What if the entire team was made up of white males? What would our previous professors and experts have to say about that team? Okay. For instance, players are encouraged to create characters who are part of expansive multi-generational families as opposed to the loner trope typically found in Anglo-European fantasy tales. Yeah, because no other games have ever encouraged or had anything to do with lineage. Ever. Yeah, no, never mind the Giovanni Chronicles in Vampire the Masquerade, where every section of that campaign you were encouraged to play a new character, but associated with the players and characters from the previous chapter of the story, forming a bloodline. Or the Ventrue Chronicles, which specifically set you up to make a bloodline, decades or centuries long tale of overlapping descendants. Right. And that's just one thing off the top of my head. Never mind how many other games have had the exact same mechanic encouraged. But here's the thing, you don't have to, because it's your game. You can do whatever you want with it. But okay, so you want to excise the presence or influence of Anglo-European fantasy tales. Okay. And how is that any different? What would you say about a designer team that was specifically making a game for Anglo-European fantasy tales that was made up of nothing but white males? Would you see that as a positive step? I wonder. Alexander sees the growth and popularity of actual plays as the first step to growing diversity within the hobby, even though minorities and women have been part of the hobby since the beginning, which you told us at the top of the article, but somehow that's been completely forgotten. You guys have no idea what you're talking about. No idea. Alexander here is pushing his own game as though it is something that is just, oh my God, so revelatory. A game based around a specific culture, imagining a fantasy world where that culture is the supreme culture. Wow, I've never heard of anything like that. Afrofuturism, never heard of anything like it before. At all. Ever. Quote, unfortunately, there hasn't been any breakthrough show yet that has displayed the kind of diversity that I want to see, he said. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of good actual plays out there with a lot of great folks, but none of them have broken through in a way that I want to see them break through yet. And part of that is due to the dominance of Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, everyone, Dungeons and Dragons. It's not Alexander here who is trying to be race essentialism. It's Dungeons and Dragons. In a recent investor meeting, Wizards of the Coast CEO Cynthia Williams described Dungeons and Dragons as under-monetized. Okay. The company's goal is to increase products targeting players even after they have purchased the source books needed to play. Yes, that's what supplemental books are for. Yeah, everybody needs their gamer crack. If you're really, really into a particular setting or game, you probably want more crack. I just finished off, at least as far as I can manage it, my collection of Modifius Publishing's Conan books, because their series of Conan role-playing game books, both the core book and the supplementals, are excellent in quality. excellent, and are practically a reference library for the Hyborian age that Conan existed in. Just for reference's sake, I can just read through those books and get interesting stories in my mind or information about the different cultures and different areas and different things about that world, because they're excellent books. They're written like they are a reference library in and of themselves. Even if you never play the game, you could have, like, if you read some of the Conan stories and like, boy, what's a Zamoran? What's specific to the Zingaran culture? Well, here's a reference book that's got all the stuff collated into one spot for you. Right? I'll buy that crack all day because I like that stuff. But there is a lot of Dungeons and Dragons material out there. And here's the other thing that maybe Wizards of the Coast doesn't realize. A lot better from the past. Their new stuff isn't popular because it leans towards too much tasteless gruel. You're reducing diversity in your own setting. You're not driving away diversity from the actual participation. That was never a problem. But you guys think it's a problem. And your solution is a problem. One of the biggest draws for Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs is the relatively low cost of investment to start. Once players buy a rule book, they can keep playing indefinitely, limited only by their own imaginations. Correct. If I have the core book from 3rd ed Vampire the Masquerade, I can run a Vampire the Masquerade game right now, and technically I don't need any of the other supplements. I don't. I can make up my own world, my own setting, my own timeline, and the people involved can make their characters out of that book alone. That is the point of a core book. That imaginative freedom is what gives minorities and marginalized people the opportunity to build worlds that center their own stories. No, that imaginative freedom is what gives anyone the opportunity to build worlds that center their own stories. Because every time you make up your own character, you're telling your own story. Every time a GM decides to set up a scenario for their players, they're making their own story, unless they're running it out of a campaign book. But even then, if you deviate from the campaign book even a little, you're making your own story. You're improvising on the fly. You're using your imagination to solve problems, to entertain your players, to get them from point A to point B, to have a sensation of accomplishment and participation and adventure and imagination. Anyone. This is not delineated by race and gender. Good gravy. On a community level, this creativity can be seen in the proliferation of homebrew games made by fans who customize the settings, characters, and rules of published systems to their liking. Anybody can do it. Anyone can do it. People do it all the time. I honestly can't think of a time that I played in any game, tabletop or live action, where there was not some homebrew shorthand rule system that was put into place because whatever was published didn't make any sense, or didn't make any sense to the setting, or in the live action setting didn't make any sense as far as like just logistics. I've seen core books for live action role-playing games where they say carry a pair of dice with you, and trying to arrange for everybody to have dice to carry with them that they don't end up taking home with them or losing or dropping somewhere and littering the place up. They came up with rock paper scissors systems, homebrew, just to get everything out of the way. Every game does that just for sanity's sake. Corporations and collective storytelling may sometimes be at odds, but quote, a thing does not have to be perfect to be good, Iyengar said. Yes. Quote, as a black woman and queer, which says nothing about you, nothing about your character, and you don't represent anyone but yourself, but okay. If I had to throw away every piece of fiction that did any of my identities dirty, I would have nothing to do but sit quietly in a room, unquote. Oh, I'm shedding a single tear. I'm shedding a single tear just for you. Oh, you decided to be offended by something. Oh, boo-hoo. This entire article is mostly nonsense. Mostly nonsense. save for like the actual, historical facts about when the games were created or who owns them and so on. You are limited only by your imagination. And I know it may only be anecdotal. I can't speak for every gamer that's ever existed, but I tell you what, I played in a live action game that was open to the public for the better part of a decade. I was part of a gaming group on a college campus for my entirety of being at that campus. And I can tell you this, the barrier for entry into those groups had nothing to do with what you looked like, but everything to do with how you behaved as a person to the other people there. If your character was a jerkwad, great. If you can play a great jerkwad in a game like that, and it's a character that you play, great. If you treated other people as a jerkwad, well, then you were short for that group. Because it's about the community. And the community was open to everybody because everybody there, in one way, shape, or form, understood what it meant to be an outsider, to be interested in these things and not having anybody to share them with. That's what marginalized everybody. And that's what brought everybody together. Everybody had a common understanding and passion. Even if I didn't know your entire life story, I could at least empathize with the notion that you are on the outside with somebody somewhere. And that we had a shared interest together, and that we could create stories together. I didn't care what you looked like. I cared whether or not you played your character well. If you followed the rules and were a good sport about it. That's it. It was a kind of mass teamwork towards creating an improvised epic story. Because I lived being on the margins. I lived being ridiculed and diminished and beat up over what I looked like or how I behaved that didn't match with everybody else. That's a common human experience. The only people I see who are divvying people up on the basis of race and deciding who is valuable and who isn't are these activists, these experts, these professors that swoop in from on high that know everything and know exactly what needs to be done. But the worst part isn't the people who have those perspectives and those opinions. Everybody's going to have those things. Racists are going to racist, right? Know-it-alls are going to know-it-all. The companies giving into it is the most pathetic part. The companies that can't even look at their own history, the communities built around their own products, and see what nonsense this is by caving to these idiots, that's the depressing part. But hey, them's the breaks. But fortunately, here's the fortunate thing. All of the rule books, all of the setting information that you need to play a classic edition of D&D, either by the setting as written or as you like, is available now. Same with Vampire the Masquerade, same with, Pathfinder, same with, Silver Age Sentinels, Call of Cthulhu, whatever. Thank goodness for the internet age. Thank goodness for places like, say, Drive-Thru RPG, where you can still get PDF copies of all the classic books before all this political correctness stuff came in. And you can conjure your own world, your own game, your own fun, without the corporation or these quote-unquote experts telling you what you should be feeling or who you should include or who you should center based on what they look like. Thankfully. Your imagination is still, as long as you allow it to be, your own. Take a second here for any comments you guys might have. I realize that I've been reading the article and not looking at chat, but I'll scroll up a bit. Yvonne Solomon. Yvonne, say something. Say something you want to say that I've missed so far. You get the spotlight because I missed your comment last night on TED Excellence just before I wrapped up. So you get first dibs. You have something you want to say, there you go. So I'll wait for that. Yeah, it's vilifying Gary Gygax as though he was some, inborn racist. Giving players options of what they want to play. Different cultures of different creatures. Magical creatures that don't exist. Why wouldn't you want to pretend to be something you're not in a role-playing game? And why shouldn't elves have a different capability than a normal human or dwarves or anything else? This is what separates them and makes them interesting. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. I've seen terrible builds using elves and excellent builds using dwarves and vice versa, if you want to min-max stuff. Or maybe the focus should be on what story you want to tell. And then when the mechanics come in, well, hey, why can't an elf have better vision than a human? Why is that a bad thing? I don't understand. Yvonne Solomon, I never understood why D&D changed their rules. My DM always homebrewed shit. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the game is yours. Whoever's running it, whatever else, as long as there's a relative consensus amongst the players to the GM or DM, depending, or the HST or whatever you want to call it. Hey, there you go. Right? The point is telling a good story and having fun, ultimately. The mechanics and the minutia of it, well, you can change it to fit. You know, it's not like Dungeons and Dragons has existed in a static world the entire time. It's been all over the place. All over the place. Right? Dungeons and Dragons has been one of the most malleable settings in all of tabletop RPGs, short of those RPGs that are just rule sets that you can fit into any setting or any genre. Let's see. I feel so special now. Well, you are special. You know, M-I-C, see you real soon. K-E-Y, why? Because I like you. O-U-S-O-B. Anyway, sorry. That was my dad's version of things. Swirly, I think what happened is nerd culture became cool and mainstream, so now you have to be the same bullies from high school, not wanting to be left out, but still wanting to bully. Yeah, the cultural dynamic has shifted so drastically from when I was a kid. You know, when I went to my first comic book convention, it was just a rented convention space with a whole bunch of fold-out tables with dealers and a few artists or writers there and a bunch of long boxes and people selling their wares, and that was it. You didn't see people cosplaying. You didn't have all this hype, all this like MTV Cribs kind of hoopla over the whole thing. It was just a whole bunch of nerds coming down to do business or to share in their nerddom, and that was it. Now, I mean, good gravy. I look at the comic cons that go across the country, and on one hand, I'm like, gee, we've really come a long way. And on the other hand, I think, boy, oh boy, this is absolutely spoiled by flashy corporatism. It's been an amazing life so far to watch the evolution of these things. Boy, oh boy. Supra Koopa Gaming. Why can't these activists see the irony of what they're doing here? They're dividing otherwise healthy hobbies and communities. Exactly. As soon as they start elevating or denigrating people on the basis of what they look like, they start monolithing people and accusing them sidewise of being negative influences on the community because of what they look like or what they are. They're doing the exact same thing as they're complaining about people having done to them their entire growing up. Our female, black, LGBTQ person who makes sure to let us know that those are the demographics that they fall into. Why would you want to separate yourself like that? I am a gamer. Period. End of story. You don't need to know anything else about me. Nothing else is relevant to this conversation. I am a gamer. I've been playing games since I was a kid. I love imagining new worlds and new characters and interacting with other people on that basis. That is the barrier for entry in every game I've played. Someone that wants to play and has fun doing it and is a good sport. Everything else has been irrelevant, but they want to make these things relevant. They want to put a value factor on what you look like, who you sleep with, what you've got between your legs. That's the opposite of this. Well, the opposite of the ideal, I should say. Absolutely degenerate. They do it because escapism is the way for people to decompress. If they can decompress, there's no revolution, so constant division and politics shoved down the throat. You're not allowed to have any kind of fun that I don't approve of. Right? If you're having fun and I don't feel like I'm being the center of the universe, you need to make your fun the center of my universe. That's all I get from this stuff. Keldrig, these activists know exactly what they're doing. Oh yeah, no. Here's the thing. They are ridiculously successful. I mean, this article wouldn't exist unless this kind of thinking was ridiculously successful. You know, they can leverage corporate fear of accusations of racism or discrimination or anything else into action by these corporations and these publications. The smallest number of people can put that fear into a giant corporation that's been making products for decades that people have loved without this nonsense. Yeah. And yet these same corporations, they will institute DEI initiatives into their own companies that effectively make everybody racists in the process. It's an amazing time to be alive and witness this. And like I said, the saving grace is all of the stuff that they don't want you to play anymore, all the stuff that they don't want you to read or appreciate anymore is on the permanent record. You can still get it. You know, you can find yourself a PDF copy of Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 and you're set for life. You don't need to look at anything else. You don't need to make any other rules. You're set. You can get a copy of 3rd Ed Vampire the Masquerade, or slightly better insofar as game mechanics, although I still recommend the lore in 3rd Ed. You can get a copy of 3rd Ed Vampire the Masquerade and a copy of the 20th anniversary edition for the rule sets, because the rules are far more streamlined in V20, and they were still clunky in 3rd Ed. But heck, people had decades worth of fun with 3rd Ed, even if the rules were clunky, because as mentioned by Yvonne Solomon and elsewise, you can always homebrew. You're not bound by law. If you find a rule set in the book that doesn't make a whole lot of sense or seems clunky, hand wave it, narrate it, come up with your own system, whatever, as long as the players are having fun. Let's see. Shadowclaw. Heck, I'm an amateur writer. I want people to enjoy the worlds and stories I make. People. Not specific demographics like, oh, this game is for indigenous peoples only. We don't want any of that Eurocentric blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. Am I allowed to play your game? If I play your game and I'm not the demographic you were aiming for, do I get some kind of demerit? Am I going to be shamed online for buying your product? You know, or are you going to say it as like, oh, well, thankfully a white person is willing to accept the culture of indigenous peoples. I can't just be interested in the genre or the setting by itself. It doesn't matter what my skin color is. I really wonder what that game author thinks of a diversity of audience that doesn't care about centering a specific race. Should only indigenous peoples play that game? If I play that game, would I be guilty of cultural appropriation? I really have to wonder. Let's see. Tales of Gore. How long before progressives are publishing their own chick tracks? What do you think D&D 5th edition is? What do you think that Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition is? We're practically there. We're already there, just in long form. And lastly, before I wrap up, Egon, a friend of my brother and I combined Shadowrun with the manga Appleseed because we were obsessed with them both in the 90s. See? There you go. I like cyberpunk. Well, you can't get much better than Shadowrun for cyberpunk, except that it's kind of like cyberpunk D&D because it's got dwarves and magic and stuff. Personally, I don't generally like mixing genres. So like if I wanted cyberpunk, I'd play Cyberpunk, the game. And if I wanted, you know, magic and dwarves and stuff, I'd play Dungeons and Dragons. Or if I wanted like a modern day magic kind of thing, maybe I'd do something like Mage. What was the original? Was Mage the Ascension the original one? I'm getting my names mixed up. Anyway, like, you know, modern day sorcerers and stuff like that. But hey, I've got several Shadowrun books. I've done an interview with Rem Alternus Gaming, who basically made a TV pilot trailer for a Shadowrun TV show. You can find that in my Familiar with the Matter series. I'm still in contact with those guys. I should hit them up sometime and talk to them again and see if they got anything new going on. But anyway, guys, with all that being said, there's my article read. I've gone far longer than I thought I would, but obviously I had a lot to say. What do you think? What do you think about tabletop gaming in general? What's your favorite game? What's your favorite edition of said game? Because Lord knows they change over time. Put them down in the comments. Let me know. And follow me on Twitter. It's at scribe_light for other shows and things that maybe you find interesting or would like to share. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can find me here Sunday for the Sunday stream at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, where I'm currently planning on doing another round of Border News Digest. Maybe I'll change my mind between now and then. We'll see, but that's the current plan. And of course, you can always find me here Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for TED Excellence, where I'll look at another off-brand TED Talk for information and illustration. I call it Illifation. Sure I do. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me for this article read. Hope you found it interesting, entertaining, and or informative. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everyone who donated, I cannot effectively express how much I'm appreciative of your generosity. Always. Thank you so much. And whether it's to myself or to the GoFundMe pinned to the top of the chat box to help out little puppy Rosebud and getting her hip healed up. Thank you guys so much for your attention and your attendance today as the pepper jack hits me just a little bit more. I hope everyone has had a good Friday so far. I hope you have a good Friday for the rest of the day. I hope you have a good weekend oncoming. I hope you are all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.